Welcome everybody to our day retreat, The Art of Forgiveness, Letting Go of Guilt, Shame, and Blame. So there'll be 4 sessions in this retreat. As most of you know, my name is Gin Kelsang Chogden, and we're live streaming from the Kadampa Meditation Center, Maryland. And all the teachings come through the incredible kindness of our lineage holder, who's in the picture behind me, Venerable Geshe Kelsang Gyatso Rinpoche. How fortunate we are to have an intact lineage of fully realized meditation masters, which go back to the time of the founder of Buddhism, Buddha Shakyamuni. And we have correct teachings and a complete path to permanent liberation from suffering and the blissful state of full enlightenment, the perfection of our human qualities. So with that introduction, this session is going to focus on letting go of guilt. But before we begin the teaching, let's meditate to relax our mind and bring inspiration into our mind, because chances are you've had a busy time before being able to settle down to watch this recording. So find a comfortable place. Hopefully you're in a reasonably quiet environment where you won't be disturbed for the next hour, and that you have a comfortable meditation chair or cushion. Having a straight back is important, so you can put a pillow behind you if necessary, and it's better to be in a chair without arms so that you can be in the proper meditation posture, which is, if you wish, right hand on left and thumbs touching, with your back straight, your head well balanced over your straight back, with your eyes lightly closed, or if your eyelids are very stable, a little bit open, and you want to place your tongue resting against the back of your upper teeth. If you're on a cushion, have your hips higher in the back, and any comfortable cross-legged position will do. If you can get into half vajra, that's a very stable position. So we'll use our imagination in this meditation. We're going to place our awareness at our heart center, which is in the center of our body at the level of our heart. And we'll be able to observe our thoughts from that location. Using our imagination, we want to allow all of our thoughts to dissolve into smoke. And breathing naturally and normally, breathe them out where they just disappear. And as more thoughts appear to your mind, allow these to dissolve into smoke and breathe these out with your next breath. And continue this for a few rounds so that your mind will become more spacious and clear. Continuing to breathe out the busyness in your mind in the form of smoke. As you breathe in, imagine you breathe in pure, inspiring light and allow this to fill your entire mind. Anything else that appears in your mind allowed to dissolve into smoke Breathe it out with your next breath. Then breathe in more inspiring, pure light and relax into this breathing cycle for a few moments. Pause to enjoy your inspired mind and deeply appreciate any greater mental peace that you've been able to create within your mind. Mental peace is an indication of our completely pure potential. If you wish, while your heart is open, you can receive blessings in the form of lights and nectar from holy beings. And we can gently come out of meditation. So we're going to look in this session at letting go of guilt. So guilt is not a Buddhist emotion, so we don't have a Buddhist definition for it. So we go to the dictionary, and in the Merriam-Webster dictionary, guilt is the state of one who has committed an offense, especially consciously. I give an example. His guilt was written on his face, for example. Another definition is feelings of deserving blame, especially for imagined offenses or from a sense of inadequacy. That's a very important definition for our topic. And the third definition is a feeling of deserving blame for offenses. And the example they give is racked by guilt, he confessed his affairs. Okay. So you didn't need these definitions to know what guilt is, because chances are you've experienced it not uncommonly. Okay. So as you listen to this teaching, try to apply it to your own life so that it has meaning for you. The important thing to understand about guilt from a Buddhist point of view is that it's a delusion. It's a distortion in our mind that causes our mind to be unpeaceful and uncontrolled, like all delusions do. So as Venerable Geshe Kelsang says in How to Transform Your Life, which is one of the books I'm teaching from here, he says, delusions are a distorted way of looking at ourselves, other people, and the world around us. Like a distorted mirror, they reflect a distorted world. So this is an important aspect of guilt, is that often we have a distortion in our mind that causes us to feel guilty. He goes on to say in How to Transform Your Life, the delusion of guilt, like all delusions, is based on our self-cherishing. All negative actions are motivated by delusions. So any negative action we performed in the past that we feel guilty about was motivated by a delusion. And these delusions, in turn, arise from our self-cherishing. First, we develop the thought, quote, I am important, unquote. And because of this, we feel that the fulfillment of our wishes is of paramount importance. Then we desire for ourselves that which appears attractive. So we have lots and lots of desires, and generally we go for something that we like, something that appeals to us. And unfortunately for us, we develop attachment. It seems that that person, thing, or situation is now going to be a source of our happiness. We fall for this every time. And of course, when we actually get that thing that we think is going to be a source of our happiness, maybe we get a little bit of temporary happiness, but doesn't last, as we all know. And we feel aversion for that which appears unattractive and develop anger. So we also have lots of things that we don't like. And we have varying degrees of annoyance, irritation, impatience, through outright anger and resentment. And we feel indifference towards that which appears neutral and develop ignorance. So from often when we want something and we try to get it, we're not paying attention to the effect of our actions on others. We're just simply focused on ourselves and trying to get what we want. The same thing when we're angry. When we're angry, we get impulsive and we do things that are not based on reason, but may be very harmful to us and to others. All of this can be sources of guilt. And of course, from these three delusions, all other delusions arise, such as jealousy. A lot of times we can perform harmful actions based on jealousy that we now feel guilty about, for example. So of course, we have performed some actions which were harmful to others based on our self-cherishing. You can just probably think of quite a few of them in your lifetime. Okay. And if we have guilt about them, it's another delusion that comes from our self-cherishing. We torment ourselves with guilt as we often exaggerate the harm we did and make it unique in our own mind, uniquely bad, as if we were the worst person in the world. And often we feel like we're the only person who has done this terrible thing. The interesting thing is we have tremendous attachment to our guilt, which causes us to think about it frequently, blaming ourselves over and over again. And as a result, we increase our anxiety and depression, for example, and we lower our self-esteem. We trap ourselves with our guilt. And if you notice, when you're guilty about something, following guilty thoughts, that you think about whatever it was in almost the same way every time you go down that delusion of guilt, those pathways. We tend to create fixed ideas in our mind of what happened and how culpable we were. and make ourselves miserable in exactly the same way over and over and over again. Now, we have such attachment to the past in this way of thinking about things that we can't change because they happened in the past. But we continue to torment ourselves in the present with guilt about them. Sometimes we even have guilt over things that we're not responsible for. So just think about that. Our mind that makes us the center of the universe, which is our self-cherishing mind, feels that we should be able to control everything we experience in our life and create a desired outcome for everything. So we have these very unrealistic expectations for our power in life, our power to make things happen the way that our self-cherishing mind wants them to happen. So I'll give you an example of this. I know someone who felt incredibly guilty growing up and way into adulthood for causing her mother's miscarriage when she was 4. Okay. She remembered asking her mother to help her find something that she was supposed to be keeping track of. In that case, it was some cows. Okay. So her mother very kindly came, and since she was an adult, they walked a little bit and found the cows, and the child was happy, and the mother returned to the house. But later that day, she had a miscarriage. And the child remembers her uncle punishing her for this, as if it were her fault. Okay. So she carried this painful guilt, thinking about it frequently. And each time she thought about it, she felt horrible. Until finally, as an adult, she's discussed this with someone. A lot of times when we feel guilty, we keep it secret to ourselves, we don't take it out in the light of day to have a discussion about what happened, particularly these things in childhood that happened that we feel guilty about, and even things earlier in our adult life when we don't have as much common sense. We sometimes do many things that we later feel guilty about as we grow older and gain more ability to have common sense and understand how life works and so forth. But in this case, she finally discussed it with someone, and it was pointed out that walking does not cause miscarriages. I mean, it seems completely silly when you look at it from the point of view of an adult. There was no way that this child actually caused this mother to have a miscarriage. I mean, 4-year-olds don't have that ability, and walking certainly doesn't cause miscarriages. If it did, there'd be no babies around. So when she really thought about it and took it in a heartfelt way, she felt immense relief and could get rid of that painful train of thought that was a delusion about something that she felt guilty that had no basis in reality. So it's very important that we examine the things we feel guilty about, and particularly those things we feel guilty about in childhood. I know other people, for example, who've had a death in the family, like a death of an older sister, who died from a medical disease. who felt incredibly guilty. Again, feeling quite responsible for causing the death of her sister. No. So these are distorted childhood memories and that are based on our self-cherishing, where we feel that we're the center of the universe and everything revolves around what we do, what we say, and so forth, you know. And many people feel guilty for causing their parents' divorce, for example. There's no way, again, a child is causing parents' divorces. You know, it's the parents' disagreement with each other and their anger and their aversion towards each other that results in a divorce. You know, the children have very little to do with this. They're just sort of the captive audience in the midst of adults who aren't getting along. You know. So we may also feel guilty because a decision we made did not turn out well for either us or for others or both. You know. Our mind of self-importance demands that we always be able to make the, quote, right decision, unquote, to get the best result for ourselves and for the extension of ourselves, which is our family members and friends. But if we get a suffering result, we get something we didn't anticipate, then we blame ourselves for not having made the right choice. You know, it's like now, because time has gone on and we know the results of our actions are the results of our decisions, and then the actions based on those decisions, we can say to ourselves, you know, if only I had made the other decision. And sometimes our decisions bring about very great sufferings, such as a driving mistake that results in an accident that kills a family member. No. We torment ourselves thinking, if only I had not gone that way. If only I had left at another time. If only I hadn't paid attention to that text message that came in. If only, you know, my car had broken down. If only I hadn't taken the children that day. I mean, there are hundreds of if-onlys that we can think about in that situation when we're feeling terrible guilt for having gotten a tragic outcome of sometimes a mistake we've made, you know. Or maybe we didn't make a mistake, but we got a tragic outcome anyway, you know. Maybe the other driver was at fault, for example. But we still blame ourselves. We still feel guilty when we get this unexpected result. I know of someone who felt guilty about not taking a family member to the hospital after about 8 other trips to the hospital, in which this family member was, you know, examined and sent home. But in this particular time, because there had been so many previous trips that basically had no major results, this person, they chose not to go to the hospital and the person died. You know. So the spouse kept blaming themselves for not going to the hospital. But again, how can we predict these things? I mean, the suffering results we get are a result of negative karma ripening in our mind, where causes and conditions came together to produce the ripening of that particular experience. And most of the negative karma that we've created in our mind has come from our past life experiences. And so we never know when an experience of suffering is going to appear in our life. But to blame ourselves because we couldn't control that suffering from appearing is tormenting ourselves. It's layering suffering on top of suffering. It's already bad enough that we had the suffering of the death in our family, or the automobile accident, or whatever happened there, that produced terrible suffering. But then to torment ourselves with guilt because we couldn't change the outcome is needless torment, because we don't have the power to change those outcomes. We can talk about what we can do in advance. We'll just talk about that in a moment. But at the time that it's happening, there's not much we can do, because that's what accidents are. They're sudden experiences of suffering. Once we're in the midst of one, we can't generally change the outcome. They happen, as we all know, very quickly. So another example would be, realizing later that we left a really good partner when we were in the midst of a crush. So we met somebody in the context of our work or, in other activities, and we allowed ourselves to form a relationship. We followed our attachment. And then at some point in time, the attachment took over and we developed a crush, and it felt like that was the only relationship that would make us happy. And at the same time, we exaggerated the badness of our current relationship, which always goes along with a crush state, where now everything at home seems gray and the only thing that seems alive and colorful is the new relationship. And sometimes we can break up our relationship to pursue the new relationship. And often we discover that, once we get into day-to-day experience with the new relationship, that it's worse than the relationship we were already in. And it doesn't last. So that's an example of a life decision based on strong attachment that causes us great suffering and causes our family great suffering. And so, again, the tendency is to feel guilty and to constantly think, if only I hadn't left that relationship, if only I hadn't met that person, if only I hadn't developed that crush, if only. We can just torment ourselves terribly with guilt about these things. But again, what has passed cannot be seen again, as Shantideva says. We can't change the past. So feeling guilty about the past serves no purpose other than to torment us. Some current issues which can result in the delusion of guilt are occurring in essential workers, for example, who get exposed to COVID-19 on the job, and then they bring it home to their family, and a family member may get terribly sick or even die from it. Or another example is someone who decides to go to a group meeting, even though there's plenty of evidence that this COVID spreads in groups, or maybe even went to some sort of social event, like went to a bar or a beach that was really crowded or something like that. And again, gets exposed to COVID. They themselves might not get very sick, but their family members can get, particularly older ones, can get very sick and die. Or they may also get very sick, because even young people are getting some terrible consequences from COVID. So that's a form of recent guilt that people have. And again, our delusion of attachment makes it seem as if we're going to be an exception to catching the virus. And then when we discover we're not an exception to catching it, and then we get some very severe consequences from it, then we can torment ourselves, bad enough that we have the severe consequences, but the delusion of guilt can easily arise in this situation. We can even feel guilty about being born in a certain race or a certain country. This is something we have no control over. Our karma that ripened at the end of our last life produced this result, and we just find ourselves in a family, either as a boy or a girl, in a certain race, in a certain country, in a certain culture, and so forth. We have no control over that. So to feel guilty about whatever race we ended up in, again, is a delusion. That doesn't give us, sometimes the guilt actually interferes in appreciating the issues of social justice, and can interfere in our really appreciating that everyone deserves respect, everyone deserves opportunities, everyone deserves equal pay, equal education, and to be able to afford housing and to have enough food on the table and so forth. I mean, all of these are social justice issues that we can actually actively work to bring about in our society with a beneficial intention. But our guilt can sometimes interfere in doing that because we don't want to look at the issues, because every time we do, we feel guilty. So again, guilt is inhibiting us and is an interference in our life. Okay, so what is a useful, non-deluded response to acknowledging our harmful actions? Because we've all performed harmful actions, both in this life and previous lives, based on our self-cherishing and our attachment to getting what we want, when we want it, how we want it. And we've developed aversion when we haven't been able to get it, towards others who are interfering in our desires and so forth. So we've all had harmful intentions and performed harmful actions. Okay. So what is a useful, non-deluded response to acknowledging our harmful actions? So the most useful mind is to develop regret. That is a Buddhist mind. Regret and guilt are completely different. With guilt, we beat ourselves up for something we now wish we had not done. Okay. So Venerable Geshe Kelsang says in a book called Meaningful to Behold, which is a commentary to Shantadeva's Guide to the Bodhisattva's Way of Life, in a section on regret. Okay. He says, we can cultivate an attitude of regret only when we recognize the connection between the harm we create and the harm we receive. However, it is important not to misunderstand what it means to regret our unskillful actions. We should not view the suffering we experience as an externally applied punishment for our sins, nor is it necessary to feel guilty, thinking we have offended some authority or force that is prepared to take revenge upon us. True regret is not concerned with such extraneous attitudes. The difference between a proper and exaggerated attitude in this matter can be illustrated as follows. A boy's parents, recognizing the dangers of fire, have prohibited him from playing with matches. He does so anyway and burns his finger. The proper, most beneficial response would be for the child to regret his carelessness and learn from his painful experience to avoid exposing himself to similar dangers in the future. An exaggerated response would be for the child to think that the match deliberately punished him for disobeying his parents. Such a superstitious reaction only confuses the situation and introduces extraneous considerations such as guilt that might in fact reduce rather than increase his ability to avoid exposing himself to similar dangers in the future. Returning now to the proper application of the opponent powers, we should try to cultivate an attitude of regret towards our unskillful, non-virtuous actions that is based not upon guilt, but rather upon a clear understanding that harmful actions causes harmful results. The enlightened beings have called certain actions, quote, non-virtuous, unquote, precisely because of their harmful effects. When we see that we have performed and are continuing to perform these potentially misery-inducing actions, sincere regret is a whole and natural and appropriate response. So developing regret for our past negative action creates the desire to purify our negative karma, using the various purification practices that Buddha taught. It's like realizing we've drunk poison and we've got to get it out of our system, and we would do so immediately. If we had drunk some poison, we immediately seek an antidote and want to throw it up. So regret moves us into the action of wanting to purify our mind. How wonderful. It is so important that we learn to recognize, reduce, and abandon our guilt, and to increase our mind of regret, and put forth effort to purify. If we do not purify our mind and continue to focus on guilt, it is likely that our guilt will appear strongly in our mind as we are dying. And this will create the causes for an unfortunate rebirth. So we have to be really careful about understanding the dangers of guilt, both now and how we torment ourselves and what its future results can be, and move instead into the direction of developing genuine regret and wanting to practice purification, which is a topic of other retreats. So now it's time to meditate. Okay. So we'll engage in liberating prayer and then I'll guide a meditation.
Blessed One, Shakyamuni Buddha, precious treasury of compassion, bestower of supreme inner peace, you who love all beings without exception, are the source of happiness and goodness, and you guide us to the liberating path. Your body is a wish-fulfilling jewel. Your speech is supreme purifying nectar, and your mind is refuge for all living beings. With folded hands I turn to you, supreme unchanging friend. I request from the depths of my heart, please eyes nourish me with your goodness, that I in turn may nourish all beings with an unceasing banquet of delight. Through your compassionate intention, your blessings and virtuous deeds, and my strong wish to rely upon you. May all suffering quickly cease, and all happiness and joy be fulfilled, and may holy Dhamma flourish forevermore.
Find a comfortable meditation posture with your back straight and your hands comfortably in your lap. Spend a few moments thinking. What do I feel guilty about? Choose one or two examples in your mind. And see if you can examine this delusion. When we feel guilty, we blame ourselves and make ourselves miserable in almost the same way each time we think about it. And yet, what we feel guilty about happened in the past. And because it happened in the past, there's no way to change it. Other than to learn and do something different in the present. Beating ourselves up serves no worthwhile purpose. And revisiting it over and over again is simply attachment. To a way that causes us suffering. Sometimes, due to our feeling that we're the center of the universe, we blame ourselves for things that couldn't have possibly been our fault. We can even feel guilty about making a decision that didn't turn out well. Blaming ourselves from not knowing the outcome before we made the decision. And the thoughts associated with guilt can make it seem as if we're the worst person in the world who committed the worst offense. Quite a distortion. We need to oppose the delusion of guilt in our mind, catching the thoughts early, reminding ourselves there's no need to torment myself in this way. Instead, I can develop regret for my past harmful actions. And use that regret to motivate myself to purify. To put into practice Buddha's teachings on purification so that I can stop negative karma from ripening in my mind in the future and in the present. This is a very positive response to our being aware that we performed harmful actions. So create a strong determination to oppose guilt in your mind, and instead to develop regret and to practice purification, and hold that in the center of your attention so that this determination can become stronger and stronger. We can dedicate so that we can be successful in opposing our delusion of guilt and increasing our regret and our wish to purify the negativity in our mind so that we give our mind protection now and in the future. And we dedicate so that each and every living being can attain permanent liberation from suffering and lasting pure peace and happiness. So thank you very much. And in our next session, we're going to look at why do we blame others?